The Muslim world has been tested with the weakest, most corrupt, and most hypocritical scholars and rulers because, as a community, our priorities have long been in the wrong place, writes the Islamic scholar Farah El-Sharif. After being ravaged by colonialism, we no longer rallied behind the core characteristics of true leadership, prophetic knowledge, principle, and integrity. We no longer valued what is just and true. We chased after the fickle mirages of autocratic power, wealth, charisma, and status. This was our downfall. As a result, we today see tight-lipped, impotent Muslim rulers idly watch the river of blood as it flows from Gaza. We see compromised scholars betray the Quranic command for justice and bend their heads in humiliation and fear of worldly powers. Save for a few, most Muslim rulers and scholarly elites have chosen self-preservation and silence. The river of blood in Gaza is also a river of treachery and collusion. With leaders like these, it is no wonder the Muslim world is in the sorry state that it is in today. Palestinians could see from the very beginning that there is nothing about the post-colonial world order, she continues. They have ever since got less and less of their rights, lands, and dignity with each passing day. In the same era, the opium of nationalism spread like wildfire as the Muslim world was carved into colonial constructed nation-states. The rest of the Muslim world enjoyed its false sense of sovereignty and accepted its bridle. Divorced from the lonesome plight of the Palestinian people, fooled into believing that the same system that gave birth to their sovereign states could guarantee their safety and protection. What, she asks, is the Muslim body today, if not diseased, aching, and wounded? Joining me to discuss the state of the Muslim world, the connection between repressive Arab regimes and the so-called war on terror, and how the genocide in Gaza expresses or exposes the moral rot within Arab ruling elites and the efforts by the West to manufacture a compliant form of Islam, is Farah El-Sharif. She received her PhD from Harvard's Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations department with a research focus on Islam in Africa and the Levant, the modern nation-state, and Muslim political movements. She is currently a visiting scholar at Stanford. You can find her work at Sermons at Court, Substack.com. Farah, let's begin with the state of the Muslim world, the Arab world, which, from the quotes that I pulled from the introduction, is, you call it a diseased body, but it's also a created body by Western powers, propped up by Western powers. You grew up in Jordan. The Hashemite rulers of Jordan were imposed on the Jordanian people. Jordan didn't exist, of course, at the beginning. Transjordan, whatever you want to call it. They are from Saudi Arabia. The oil interests created the rulers of the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And this has just been a kind of legacy, whether it's, Sisi in Egypt or any other kind of pliant ruler. So let's talk about the state of the Arab world, and let's talk about, and we were together in Jordan this summer, the failure on the part of Arab rulers to push back in any, with the exception of Yemen, of course, push back in any meaningful way against the genocide of the Palestinian people, and then in many cases actually collaborate with the Zionists to overcome the maritime blockade imposed by Yemen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me and the generous introduction. Really, it's if you ask any person in Gaza, they will tell you that the thing that hurt them the most was not the American, German, and Israeli bombs. It was the cowardice of kin. It was the collusion. It was the abandonment with this kind of Zionist campaign to exterminate them. That is what is the source of their true emotional and psychological scar. So to say that the Muslim community worldwide is stuck between a rock and a hard place is probably the understatement of this century. So if it isn't these bombs, quadcopters, drones that are shredding our bodies and burning our children alive, it's these colonially installed puppets that look towards this a model of empire and salivate over it, competing in who gets to please it the most and who gets to bend over to be compliant towards it. So these security states have our people strangulated, whether it is through surveillance, repression, or intimidation. And if it isn't the horrific Sidnaya prison that we've seen footage of and other sadistic torture dungeons under Assad's Syria, it is the hundreds of other unknown torture cells still operating in the West Bank, Egypt, Saudi, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Jordan, East Turkestan, and India, Kashmir, where political prisoners are detained by the hundreds and held under gruesome conditions, often without charge. So if it isn't that, it's the Israeli soldiers that relish in breaking the bones of Palestinian children prisoners. It's the Taiman concentration camp where Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya was abducted over a week ago with no word from him, and where Dr. Adnan al-Bursh of a Shifa hospital was brutally raped and killed before him. It is the crude and sadistic Israeli parliamentarian urge to protect the so-called right to rape. If not that, it is the moral stain of Abu Ghraib. It is the Patriot Act that detains people like Dr. Afia Siddiqui, the rest of the Holy Land Five, and men like Abu Zubaydah, Guantanamo's so-called forever prisoner, or America's tortured guinea pig, who still resides in Guantanamo since 2002, and who we forget is of Palestinian descent himself. So this, like you rightly pointed out, Krish, this systemic repression that Muslim communities worldwide experience is inextricably linked to the interventionist, expansionist, supremacist American, Israeli, Western project. In a twisted way, they kind of all work together like this pharaoh behemoth protected by Orwellian buzzwords like liberal democracy or state sovereignty or the so-called rules-based order, which Gaza has exposed as nothing but a ruse-based order. So it is as if this entire ecosystem of repression feeds on injustice. And we've reached the abyss of repression. And this world order is this Frankenstein-like world whose horrors have been unleashed primarily on innocence. So what the great African-American theologian James Cone called structural sin, we've reached an alarming level of that, of desensitization to atrocious mass violence. And what does all of this do? It kills and strangulates all of us, not just Muslims. It produces this endemic spiritual death, which affects not only Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians, but humanity as a whole. So this pernicious web of carceral cancer is sustained by the politics of compliance to an empire which sees like Muslims like me, Palestinians, and Arabs as mere fodder for this monstrous system. Nowhere is this collusion more evident than things like basic human rights and civil liberties being eroded in the West. Look at the state of Muslims in Germany. Or just last week, I think a senator from Florida, Randy Fine, tweeted essentially a final solution, a call for a final solution, saying that it's high time we dealt with this fundamentally dangerous culture, i.e. Islam. Well, what I would say to that is what is fundamentally dangerous and broken of a culture is one that has normalized genocide, one that is okay with watching images of people being burned alive and moving on with their day. That is what is fundamentally broken, and that is what is dangerous. So this manufacturing, decades of manufacturing, the Muslim menace, this idea of the war on terror, or let's change that proposition and call it a war of terror, a war of state terror that has Muslim political prisoners locked up and exterminated. This same campaign also sustains and funds the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the ongoing land grab, annexation, and colonization of land in Syria and Lebanon. And so all of this is part of a campaign to dominate and redraw the Middle East, straight out of a 21st century crusader, Zionist colonial playbook. Except this campaign is more militarized, it's more advanced, it's more funded and supremacist than ever before. So I don't think that this is a controversial point, Chris, but I wrote this in my Substack that we are currently living in an age of Muslim internment, but we don't call it as such. We've reached a point where we have normalized the genocide and extermination of a people deemed to be bad wholesale according to the logic of the Judeo-Western Christian civilization. So, yes.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that since World War II, we've primarily normalized seeing images of torture, basically on Muslim bodies, from Bosnia, Abu Ghraib, the Rab'a massacre, West Bank, and now in Gaza, the Rohingya, the Uyghurs. So it's definitely a time of harrowing sort of desensitization and dehumanization on a global systemic level.
Well, as you are well aware, the United States acted no differently from Israel, as Israel is, of course, the genocide is more pronounced, but the kinds of the torture, the tactics, the indiscriminate killing, the racist language, this was all part of the project, the imperial project in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria. We have a kind of historical amnesia here in the United States. But certainly within the Muslim world, especially those people that have borne the brunt. I mean, 1 million Iraqis were killed because of our occupation of the country? They don't forget. They know.
No, absolutely, Chris, you're right. And I think that you talked about, with Dr. Gabor Mate, you talked about fragmented morality. But what we're seeing now in a lot of this knee-jerk geopolitical reactions to what's going on in the region, in the Middle East, is a kind of fragmented vision. And what you were saying about amnesia is absolutely true. So I'm trained as an intellectual historian, where my job is to look at the longue durée of ideas and look at the kind of the macro arc of where we're going as a human whole. And so I don't say this to be an alarmist. I'm probably the most dogmatic person that you could talk to, but I say this not to kind of play the victim card that, oh, we Muslims, we need help, we're so helpless, and then turn that victimization into, furthering another kind of oppression or another kind of injustice. And we've seen that happen to many people who are oppressed or repressed. Suddenly they become the tyrant. And I think that for Muslims in Islam, we're at a kind of a turning point, a testing kind of, Gaza has been kind of the litmus test for Western leadership to basically see if there truly are about the highest ideals of Western civilization, protecting the right to liberty, the right to life, the right to freedom. And it is exceedingly clear that these freedoms only extend to the in-kind group. They're only seen as worthy to Westerners, to white people. Whereas when it comes to these barbarians abroad, let's just decimate them, let's just destroy them. And this arrogant expansionist program is very reminiscent of the 18th and 19th century colonial brutal campaigns that I read about when it comes to the French in West Africa or the Dutch in Indonesia. And it's exactly all from the same colonial playbook. Except now it is fattened up with this, like I said, this Orwellian cover of civility and democracy. And we should not forget that this campaign that we are seeing now is exactly out of, Netanyahu's kind of wet dream for the Middle East to take all of it, essentially. And in 1996, you know better than me, Chris, about the clean break policy that was designed to take out 7 countries in 5 years. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, and then swallow the region whole. And for anybody to look at one regime change and to say that that's not part and parcel of this campaign. Even the war on terror was cooked up in Tel Aviv in 1982 or even before in 1979 through the Yonatan Institute that Netanyahu himself founded. He said, we're done with the red threat now. Now is the green threat, that of Islamic terror. And so a lot of Muslims even internalize this war on terror rhetoric, and they themselves start being apologetic and say, oh, Islam is peaceful, Islam is this, Islam is compatible with democracy, Islam is compatible with civility. And I see that as a sign of decimated consciousness, not just double consciousness. They don't know their own faith, they don't know their own history, and so they start being apologetic about it, and that is a position of weakness.
Well, that is, and you've written about this, there's a huge push to create this kind of quisling form of Islam. That's what the Abraham Accords are. So, we divide, and this is classic colonial rule, we divide, let's put it in commas, the natives into the good natives and the bad natives. Those who are willing to serve in our colonial police force, like the Palestinian Authority, which is currently attacking Jenin, and has thrown Al Jazeera out of the West Bank, imagine, following, of course, Israel's example within Israel proper. Let's talk about that, the attempt to create divisions within the Muslim world and this insidious project, and the Abraham Accords, I think, epitomize that, to create, quote unquote, the good Muslim.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very archetypal story in a sense that in every struggle for liberation, there will always be the collaborators, the native informants, if you will, who kind of throw their people under the bus and scurry the favor of the powers that be and try to kind of gain favor in exchange for petty crumbs. But ultimately, history, scripture have shown us that it is a Faustian bargain. At the end of the day, these people who think that by cozying up with repressive forces of empire like Israel and the United States at the expense of the actual lives of the people they govern, they do that thinking that they're securing their reign, or that they are getting political expediency, or perhaps their son might become king next, or some kind of delusional worldly fantasy like that. But the funny thing that you mentioned about the Abraham Accords and how they are singularly pernicious, Chris, is that they use this language of kind of this prophetic authority. They invoke Abraham as the father of all three religions, and hence give this kind of treacherous collusion a kind of a prophetic theological tinge. And this is, again, part and parcel of this Orwellian doublespeak, where, this time they have Muslim scholars, even here in America, Muslim scholars who defend that, who are in cahoots with the UAE and Saudi, who are mum about the genocide in Gaza. And so historically, we've had Muslim scholars in the lead of anti-colonial resistance movements. Today, you see they're fully co-opted, or they're in dungeon prisons, like in Saudi right now. I read yesterday that every 25 hours, one person is executed under MBS's Saudi Arabia. The other day, just somebody I know was detained for around 3 months, a woman, for wearing a kufiya, a Palestinian kufiya in the holy mosque of Mecca. So this is the kind of cancerous kind of a relationship that I was referring to earlier. And the funny thing is, Chris, the irony about the Abraham Accords is that in the Islamic intellectual tradition, the Prophet Muhammad was asked about the Prophet Abraham and what he stood for. So one of his companions asked the Prophet, tell us about the Abrahamic scrolls. And you know what the Prophet said about that? He said, the Prophet Abraham used to speak like this: "O you wretched, insolent, conceited king, I did not send you to this world to collect worldly benefits. Rather, I sent you to supplicate, or to respond to the supplication of the oppressed on my behalf. To respond to the supplication of the oppressed on my behalf." And this is the exact opposite of what the Abraham Accords, backed by the UAE and Saudi, Bahrain, Morocco, do. They actually strangulate the oppressed. They are actually all the people living under the rubble or starving or dying from the cold in Gaza were only able to get to that point because of the collusion and collaboration of Arab and Muslim normalizers.
Let's, for people who don't know what the Abraham Accords are, this is Jared Kushner's project under the Trump administration. Explain what it's, I mean, in its rough description, it essentially normalizes relationships, diplomatic relationships between Israel and Saudi Arabia at the expense of the Palestinians, of course. But talk about the Abraham Accords and why they are so pernicious.
Yeah, so it was signed in 2020, like you correctly said, under the Trump administration. It was, you could say, Kushner's kind of a vision alongside Netanyahu, of course. And it was signed between the U.S. and people don't even realize that Palestine is not even part of this accord. They arrogantly cut out the people whose lives are affected primarily. Just this is about them. This is about Palestinians, and yet they weren't consulted. They weren't even present. And so this is part of this kind of effort to kind of enact this cultural change to promote a kind of Islam that is a quietist Islam, that is just cultural, that is just cosmetic. Women in hijabs, great. Men who go to the mosque, great. This rote ritual type of Islam that is devoid of its true spiritual core, its prophetic calling, which is to speak a just word in the face of a tyrant. That is the greatest jihad, we're taught in our tradition. So it's only later, actually Saudi itself never signed this. There's an article, if you look it up, maybe 1 week before October 7th, MBS said, we're very close to signing peace with Israel. And so even now, after the Gaza genocide, that has not been a disqualifier for any of these Arab regimes to stop or take back those treaties. They still have kept their word on these accords, on these peace treaties, these trade routes. And so when we say that these Arab armies, these militaristic behemoths, they've only been fighting their own people. They haven't been defending the oppressed that need them in places like Gaza. So, and now because of these Gulf states coming into the picture, we are seeing a more cancerous kind of form of normalization on the state level where you see even ordinary journalists, Muslims going online, say, oh, we need to coexist. We need to do that. We need to do this. But then how can you coexist with an entity that is essentially trying to basically decimate your entire religious character, your identity, your beliefs, your core scriptural commitments, let alone, your brethren's bodies and their right to exist?
Before we talk about, I think you would agree, the kind of, to me, inexplicable silence on the part of many Muslim leaders over the genocide. Let's talk about what these Arab regimes are actually doing in Jordan, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, the land bridge that was set up, the fleecing of Palestinians by Allah, the shooting down of the active assistance by the Jordanian, well, they say it was Jordanian, it was probably heavily American. When I was in Jordan, I was a little surprised to see so many American contractors and soldiers, not in uniform, of course, in the hotel where I was at. But let's talk about what they're actively doing. They're not just passive, but the active support for the Zionist state in the midst of the genocide.
Oh, yes. I mean, again, if we want to move away from having a fragmented vision and looking at specific states and how they approach Palestine, Palestine has been kind of a revealer, and it's pointing us to the longer arc of history. I remind your listeners that these nation states were basically concocted out of a kind of a colonial kind of divide and conquer classic strategy after World War I, things like the McMahon policy or the Sykes-Picot. And so these states are cut from this kind of smelly leftovers of the French and the British empires. And people think that just when you declare independence or, now you're sovereign, it doesn't actually mean that that we are free or sovereign. On the contrary, it means that the level of control and coercion and repression has gone underground, is more ambiguous, it's harder to locate. So that is why, for example, if you go to a protest in a place like a Jordanian university and you say something, you could get snatched up. Or in Egypt, you express solidarity with the Palestinians. People are afraid to do that because they think that that could be cause for them to basically disappear and go underground. So again, this ecosystem of fear not only surveils and kind of mutes people who are so-called not in kind of not in the genocidal atmosphere. But I like what there was an Egyptian taxi driver in a video that went kind of viral. He was he rode with a gentleman from Gaza, and when he found out that he was from Gaza, he started crying, and he said, "No, I won't take your money. And this is the least I could do, not to take your money. Forgive us, for we are occupied too," he said.
يا بنعمل حاجة، لا فينا نعمل حاجة، لا من نسأل عليكم. خلاص. صعبان على أصلا إن أنا عايش، مش عارفة أعمل حاجة لأن نهك. لا يا عم الله يسهل عليك. أي حد تعرفوه سامحوا السيد محمد عبد المجيد. سامحوه، أنا مش عارف أعمل لكم حاجة.
And I think that is the sentiment that all Arabs feel, but that they cannot say, that we are also occupied. We are also under this thumb of this brutal repressive system, whereas Palestinians have had the courage to break free from that. So in a sense, Gaza, sometimes the Arabs say that it represents the most free place on earth, because it broke out of that prison. And so a lot of these prisons that Muslims have in these Muslim majority Arab countries are mental colonization. If they see a policeman on the street, perhaps they shrink and cower more. Even I grew up in Jordan. It's a police state. So I remember my dad, God rest his soul, he was a veteran journalist like you, Chris, and he was the editor-in-chief of Jordan's oldest daily. I remember it very well that when we started talking about something slightly taboo or slightly dangerous, they would say, "Oh, the walls can hear everything," or he would crack a joke and he'd say, "Oh, you're the neighbor's daughter, you're not my daughter," just to kind of joke like that. But these were the kinds of jokes that not funny, this is the kind of climate that we grew up in. And now to see it become in this form where it's a form of insanity, where you have your own people, your next of blood and kin, being kind of exterminated right next door. And not only that, you see that the trade route that goes and funds the occupation, boxes and boxes of tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce and produce that go to feed and sustain the settlers and the soldiers while Gaza starves.
Let me just make clear that this comes in this pipeline, UAE, Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, over the King Hussein Bridge.
Correct, Chris. And so, we should probably shed light on the plight of Hiba Abu Taha, who,
yes.
The journalist who merely conducted an investigative report about this trade route, this land, lifeline, for the occupation, and she is currently doing 5 years in jail and is paying very hefty penalties for so-called cybercrime. And this is the kind of it's kind of a warning for others that don't you dare expose complicity or collusion or collaboration, because you'll end up in a cell or a ditch like her. So it's just the nice thing about it, Chris, though, it's like there's no ambiguity anymore. That people can no longer say that, oh, we should give them the benefit of the doubt. They're doing their best. It's a tough neighborhood. I hate this cliche. I hear it all the time. And they're always kind of invoking that, oh, it's a tough neighborhood. Politics are dirty. But it's being blown off with crystal clear clarity that this is one occupation. It's one system. The enemy is one. And so it's up to people and their moral clarity and moral courage to every day shed a little bit of that fear, because once they partake in it and once they accept it, they say, oh, generations of people who live in fear, and I accept this. I think my generation and hopefully my children's generation will no longer accept that kind of degradation, denigration, and fear-based rule.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised the plight of Hewa, who, as you know, I tried to visit. I filled out all the paperwork and then sat outside the prison, the women's prison in Amman all day, and wasn't finally allowed in. How fragile are these regimes? Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. I sense they're very fragile.
Yeah, I mean, we forget that this nation state structure that was cooked up in the kitchen of people like T.E. Lawrence and Sykes-Picot and basically are constructs. They're recent constructs, and we think of them as something that is the status quo since time immemorial, but they're really not. They stand on very fickle ground, as we saw. That things can change overnight. And so it reminds me of the story of Pharaoh, who in the Quranic scripture that we share with our Jewish and Christian brethren, is that right before when he got to the zenith of his power, right before he got to Moses, the sea split and swallowed him whole, and he became kind of, until this day, a sign and a kind of a lesson and a symbol for what happens to people who think that they are invincible, for people think that they will live forever. And so God knows, what the future brings. But this level of foundational rot, I don't think can hold much longer.
Let's talk about, you and I were at an event, it was a year ago in Toronto. We were talking about Palestine. And what struck me after we spoke is the number of young people who came up and asked me, and probably you, why the Muslim leadership didn't say what was not unequivocal in the condemnation of the genocide and unequivocal in the condemnation of the apartheid state of Israel. And I want to ask you that question. How do you characterize the response of the Muslim leadership in the United States?
Yeah, I remember that, Chris, and it was heartbreaking, and it still is. And I thought about this a lot, and I think it's largely due to the fact that this war on terror rhetoric that kind of weeds out the bad from the so-called good Muslims, the good Muslims who are compliant, who don't support so-called radical, brutal acts of terror. So it's almost as if this colonial rhetoric has been internalized in the consciousness of Muslim scholars and leaders. And so that they say that when perhaps that if we stand with the oppressed, if we speak up for Gaza, the powers that be might think that I support Hamas or that I support this and that. So again, it's like this, not just decimated consciousness, like I said, it's more than that. It's kind of capitulating completely, because you're saying that the vernacular of justice has to be removed from Islam for me to have a seat at the table, for me to gain, proximity to power, maybe get the ear of Biden or get the ear of Trump. And I see this happening a lot, that some Muslims are scurrying the favor of the right-wing kind of platform and thinking that, oh, at least, we meet on certain points regarding, families and family values and whatnot. So to me, this just signals a huge crisis in our priorities. It signals terrible misunderstanding of the true aim and kind of point of being a Muslim, and that is standing firm in your own principles and ethics and higher morality that is tethered to the throne of God, that is tethered to the oneness, the true oneness of God. So other than oneness, what do we have? Multiplicity. And multiplicity signals, I'm afraid of this commitment. What if I do this? What if I say that? And so that is, in a sense, a kind of a hidden polytheism. And so when someone who has a position of authority and scholarship, and people look up to them, and then they lapse in that responsibility, the whole community is hurt. And the young people are like, where do I locate my Islam? Who am I? What does it mean? And so that is why I think, we are in this place. We're too comfortable with our salaries, upgrading to our SUV and our nice, respectable suburban life, while our brethren overseas get killed. It's a complete lapse of leadership and collective morality.
Explain to me this conundrum of Muslims for Trump.
It's
kind of like Jews for Hitler. I mean, maybe not that extreme, but I mean.
No, but I mean, that's where, that gives you a window in how this destroyed kind of consciousness, this severe inferiority complex, where you are willing to basically, shut up and accept racist rhetoric about you and your people. And it's this amnesic kind of just, the Muslim ban is still ongoing. Like it's not like it ended under Biden. And so it saddens me that Muslims for Trump is even a thing, because what you're buying into the very campaign that's going to probably deal the final blow. And already you can see how very vitriolic and toxic X and platforms like that are, and full-blown Islamophobia, xenophobia. And there's this like maybe strongman appeal to people who think that, oh, well, this is a leader, and maybe these are remnants from autocratic nostalgia, that I see bumper stickers in Amman for Saddam Hussein. I guess this is this idea that, okay, if this leader is strong and tells it like it is, and he doesn't mince his words, then he must have something charismatic or strong.
But at least Saddam Hussein was an enemy to the Zionist state.
Right.
I mean, I remember I was in Ramallah this summer with Atif Abu Saif, and he said, if you go in these houses, you won't see a picture of Arafat, you'll see a picture of Saddam. But Trump has never done anything positive for Muslims.
No. It's baffling, and it signals a dangerous level of kind of maybe collective insanity. But there are pockets of hope. I think that, I guess, by and large, this election cycle was manic for everybody. And I think we've reached a point where this lesser of two evils conundrum has reached a point where it can no longer be replicated in future election cycles. People are sick of lesser of two evils. They just want no more evil, no more. They just want the good, the true, something other than, an orange fascist in charge, or a Black woman who's, funded genocide. So this conundrum, this strangulation, this chokehold that we're in, for me is a good thing, because it signals that, okay, at least this Leviathan is probably taking its last breaths, and that more sane, conscientious people with a moral conscious, with a real pulse, with a real concern for humanity, hopefully, will be the ones to come next and inherit this ailing world.
So where do you see us going in the months and years ahead? And then to close, what do you tell young people, in particular young Muslims? But let's just, I don't, for the foreseeable future, for me, it looks pretty dark.
Yeah. It's a hard question, but also it keeps me up at night. I think about this a lot. I've always been this intense girl that my family makes fun of me, that even as a younger kid, I was always brooding and thinking about the Muslim world, our affairs, our conditions. So I'd like to refer to a lecture that I was at when I was a student at Georgetown in 2008. My favorite Catholic theologian, Hans Kung, gave the Nostra Aetate annual lecture at the time. And he said something that really blew my mind. He said that in his comparing Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, he said that Judaism rests on kind of tribal, hierarchical commitments. And so its natural culmination, its natural telos is the ethno-religious state of Israel. And that is its final conclusion. And then he went on to say that Christianity is beheld by the papacy and the institutionalization of the church. And that's its logical conclusion. When he talked about Islam, he said, Islam is in its essence universalist, and it's tethered by this idea of oneness of man and Muhammad as a mercy to all of humankind, not just Muslims. But their final arc or their final culmination has not been decided yet. So I call on my fellow Muslims to take this opportunity of rampant moral rot, of decay and destruction in the systemic world order that we live in, that has exposed itself as hypocritical, essentially anti-Muslim, brutal, and completely inhumane, to kind of lean in to their agency as Muslims that can perhaps bring about a brighter future, that can perhaps, fulfill this untold role, a positive role collectively for that Islam can offer the world. Because unless and until we remain shackled in our mental and spiritual colonized mentality, whether it is about how we know ourselves, how we know religion, how we conduct ourselves politically, we will never break free. And so we have the potential to do that. We have the potential to be like Malcolm. For me, he's the greatest American Muslim exemplar and courageous leader. We call him the great American Shaheed, the martyr of America, who he himself visited Gaza in 1964, and he said the spirit of Allah was strong in Gaza. So look to these people instead of trying to wait for your average imam or your charismatic sheikh to grow a backbone. You have plenty of exemplars within our tradition, living and dead, including the people of Gaza themselves. There is a Quranic kind of pointer there that the oppressed shall become the teachers. They shall become the role models of faith, similarly to how in Christianity, the meek shall inherit the earth. So the kind of fortitude that the people of Gaza have, let that not go in vain. The other day, I saw a video, Chris, that I can't get out of my mind, of a father holding the shroud of his child in the ambulance. And he was speaking so clairvoyantly, so prophetically, that it gave me goosebumps all over. He's saying, Ya Netanyahu, Ya Arab, O Netanyahu, O you Arabs, O you colluders, everybody who failed us. Allah is only raising you so that he can tear you down. So don't think that what you see, all of this supremacy, this militarization, this ironclad power, this supremacy is going to be the name of the game forever. It's only this shocking in its dehumanization, this shocking in its genocidal bloodlust, for it to hopefully wither away and usher in a different world, a better world.
Great. Thank you, Farah. I want to thank Diego, Sophia, Thomas, and Max, who produced the show. You can find me at chrishedges.substack.com.